Wisp Sports Radio, the voice of women in sport.
Hello, and thank you for downloading episode 1 of Mind Matters podcast. I'm Chris Stafford.
And I'm Jenny Susser.
And here we are, Jenny, with a brand new show. I'm going to leave you to tell everybody what it's about, because it is actually very serious content, because you're a sports psychologist. But before we tell people what it's about, let's introduce you. What should they need to know about Jenny Susser?
Well, I am, by title, I'm a clinical health psychologist. So I make the joke that I'm a shrink. And then I follow that with, although I like to call myself a stretch. So I'm a licensed psychologist, and I became a psychologist in order to do sports psychology. So while I also do clinical, I specialize in sport and performance psychology, which has sort of taken me all over the map and in many different directions over the course of my career. I started out at the Hospital for Special Surgery working with athletic injury recovery, which was what I studied in graduate school for my dissertation. And then I moved to sports teams. I've worked with a couple of professional teams and some Division I college teams, a lot of individual athletes with a lot of different performance issues, female athlete triad, injury recovery, performance anxiety, you name it, everything. And I've discovered that I've worked with just about every sport. For a long time, I hadn't worked with anyone in the shooting sports, and then I finally started working with an archer. So I've everything from a female Greco-Roman wrestler, Olympic wrestler, to swimming, diving, track and field, football, everything, just about every sport. So I've had a really nice wide range of people and teams that I've worked with. I am an equestrian, and I do most of my sport work in the equestrian world. I was the team psychologist for the 2012 dressage Olympic team in London, and that was a tremendous honor and incredible experience. And then I made my way to corporate somehow and started doing some work in the corporate world, and have about a decade of experience doing corporate trainings and executive coaching and consulting and program delivery in the corporate world. So like my dad used to always call me, and who knew it was a harbinger, the jack of all trades, ace of none.
All right, or Jill of all trades.
Yeah, there we go. Thank you.
Well, the very topic of sports psychology is something that is now so first and foremost in a lot of athletes' mind, because we have a service now. Teams, organizations, they provide that service to athletes, as you mentioned, that you had done yourself. This is, I don't know how long ago we became more aware of sports psychology and the importance of sports psychology, or having a psychologist available to athletes, especially professional athletes. I wouldn't say it's a recent development, but it's something that's growing in impetus over time, isn't it? And especially with the topics that we're faced with today in this world today, Jenny, it becomes even more critical, doesn't it, that people have access to it so they have the tools to cope.
Yes, absolutely. So I graduated in 2002, and when I became a sports psychologist and told people that I was a sports psychologist, they'd go, "Oh, cool." And then their eyes would sort of roll back in their head, and they'd go, "Well, what is that?" So, 20 years ago, it was just starting to gather some steam. And part of it has been stigma, for sure, because the word psychology is attached to it. So for a very long time, teams and individual athletes didn't want to talk about working with a sports psychologist. Early, like in the late 1990s, Ken Ravizza worked with the Anaheim baseball team, the Anaheim Angels, I think they're called. I'm not a baseball fan, unfortunately. He also worked with the Miami Dolphins. So it's been around for a very long time. It just it didn't have the traction early on. And then a couple of, top athletes began working with sports psychologists and on performance issues. And then it sort of picked up some steam. And then, recently we've had a lot of high profile athletes come forward to talk openly and candidly about some of their mental health issues, which has just created, an incredible opening for many, many people to seek the kind of help, not just performance-wise, but also personally with their mental health.
Yeah, we're taking the stigma out of it, aren't we? Because there's such an important role of sports psychology today.
All over the place, and I think it's following sport into the corporate world. Mental health. There's a lot of companies that employ a chief well-being officer for the first time. I think Fast Company wrote an article in 2009 saying every company needs a chief well-being officer, and it really hasn't taken off until recently. Big companies like Deloitte I actually know the chief well-being officer there, Jennifer Fisher, and she's fantastic. And she has been at the forefront of creating mental health as a priority and wellness as a priority that doesn't just include sick days or recovery time, but how do you tend to yourself regularly?
So why don't you tell everybody what this show is going to be about as we roll it out in the coming months?
Well, this show is called The Mind Matters because it does. And I find that we don't tend to, a term I like to steal from a neuropsychologist named Richard Davidson. He calls it mental hygiene. And he is at the forefront of mindful meditation training in primary school children in Southern California. He works with the Orange County school districts. And I found him on a podcast, actually, and listened to him talk about mental hygiene. And I just thought, this is it. This is it. It's so important. He compares mental hygiene to dental hygiene. And the thing that I love about it is it's such a great comparison. If you think about dental hygiene, a century ago, nobody brushed their teeth. It wasn't a part and parcel of every single person's life every single day. But if you think about it now, especially in developed countries, who doesn't brush their teeth? And who would consider not brushing their teeth? It's just something that we do every day. If you talk to parents and ask them, what was it like to train your children to brush their teeth? Some say, oh, it wasn't very hard, but most say, oh my gosh, it took years. It took a long time. It took a lot of bribery or, arm twisting to get kids to brush their teeth regularly, to remember to brush their teeth. But then it just becomes part of your day and part of your routine and part of your life, because they have found the result from having a dental hygiene program is incomparable. So it saves money, it saves lives, it increases lifespan. There's all kinds of incredible research on dental hygiene. So when I think about mental hygiene, this is my wish, is that we all develop a mental hygiene program, that we begin to tend to our minds, not just our brain, but our mind, depending on how you define that: consciousness, imagination, thought, reaction, emotion. There's so many things that are wrapped up in everybody's definition of mind, but I don't think we tend to it enough. And I definitely don't know very many people that tend to it every day. And I imagine a world and what it would be like if we really did, if we developed those skills early, and if we knew how to take care of our minds and our mental hygiene. I think that, to me, is why something like this is important. And I'm just a foot soldier. There are a lot of people who are working to make this form of what I call mental hygiene a regular reality for everybody.
So where would you like to start with this show then? Where should we begin on this episode?
Well, one of the things that seems quite salient these days is the sexual misconduct, especially with the introduction of safe sport from Congress and how it's being applied across the board in many different sports. And talk a little bit about the disruption that this movement causes, both in a good way and in a bad way, and how we can start to think about it in a more powerful way so that we can tolerate the disruption and continue to move forward and and forge new ground and find new ways to grow from it, and then also create more strength and power and definitely prevention.
So we're going to call this We Need to Know, because this is first and foremost, isn't it? It's what we feel instinctively. We need to know whatever things go off the rail, or even if they don't. But we're talking about when things do go wrong and we're confronted with something that we don't have control over.
Yeah, human beings have a tremendous need for certainty and to know. It is something that we have so much difficulty tolerating, is not knowing. In the business world, there's been a huge movement recently about curiosity and developing curiosity. Now, while that's good to talk about, it's a little bit of putting the cart before the horse, because we need to look back and sort of examine, okay, why are we driven to know these things? Why do we need certainty? And then how does curiosity support us in that, lastly? So I'm a big fan of neuropsychology and the advances that we've had in our ability to study the brain and its functioning over the last 2 decades. They've been remarkable. When I was in graduate school in the late 1990s, we had one class on neuropsychology, and it really looked at the regions of the brain and then the drugs that you can take to affect the different regions of the brain. And that was it. It was a semester. But with the advent of the different types of technology, the functional magnetic resonance imaging technology, electron microscopy, we can see deeply into our structures and help us really determine what's being used, what's operating against us. And we've really learned so much about the brain that, to me, that gives us incredible insight into the mind. So something that I've really come to understand and just see play out all the time for us is that we are a survival-based being. Now, human beings who live in first world countries, and probably everybody listening to this podcast or anybody who's read any of my work or followed me at all, has very little threat to their survival on a daily basis, right? So our survival needs are, shelter, food, water, clothing, and community. Human beings we're a tribal being. We need each other to survive. So for us, most of our survival needs are met on a daily basis. So we don't think about survival anymore. We used to when we were hunters and gatherers, and, we had to prepare for different weather patterns. Now it's kind of like, oh, it's going to rain this weekend. Do I need to go to the store beforehand? We have the ability to forecast hurricanes. I live in Central Florida, so Hurricane Dorian last week sure upended my life. But we have the ability to prepare for it. So survival has a very different meaning to us cognitively. However, innately, it's got the same meaning. Is this making sense?
Yes, of course it's making sense. So in terms of that certainty and preparation, we can't prepare for something that blows us away, psychologically necessarily, because, if we don't see something coming, like, coming back to your point about this Me Too movement and the sexual misconduct that we're seeing everywhere, the abuse, it isn't just sexual misconduct, it's that power abuse. There's things that creep up on us and we don't actually necessarily cognitively know they're happening. And we're made aware now, of course, how it's being unpacked, and we have a whole different perspective of it. So we don't have that control. We don't see it if we don't know what we don't know, right?
Yeah, that's one of my favorite sayings. I remember the first time I learned that we don't know what we don't know until we know we don't know it. Yeah, very, very confusing. But the part that our survival instinct messes up with us is that we are reaction based in terms of our behaviors. So because our brains and our bodies are trying so desperately to survive all the time, what we have naturally, innately, is we react to everything. And if you think about it, some of our reactions are awesome. Something's coming at your eye, you blink. You learn how to drive and someone swerves to cut you off and you swerve. So a lot of our reactions that are survival based are really handy. Keep us safe, keep us alive. We want to keep those in play. However, on a more emotional, mental, psychological level, when we react to something out of survival, we tend not to be our best selves during a reaction. And it's really, really hard to have a reaction, take a step back, stop, take a breath, regain your composure, and then respond. And that's where people gain their power, is when they're able to respond, when they're able to see, oh my gosh, I'm reacting to that. Take a breath, get some of their cognitive functioning back, and then choose a response. But we're so naturally reactive, and culturally we've been so reactive for so long without awareness to it that reaction has just sort of become acceptable. So getting angry, being mean, saying nasty things, saying hurtful things, yelling, striking out physically or emotionally. All these things are reactions. And because we haven't had access to anything else, they've become a little bit too acceptable. And we've lost our way a little bit, and we've lost our minds. When we don't think, when we only react, they're not good choices typically.
Well, here's some really mundane example of that. We've all had, out the corner of our eye, a creature land on our leg, an insect, whatever it might be. It might be something that you suddenly feel it, and you go to swat it away immediately, right? Because it could be a mosquito biting you, a horsefly, whatever. And we have that sort of instinctive reaction to it. And yet if we stop and look, oh, it's just a butterfly, or it's something that's so harmless, I want to set it on one side, or it's a ladybird, or something that you don't want to harm it. I mean, if it's a mosquito, you want to swat it. Right? But it's that immediate reaction that we have, that we flick it away. We think, oh, gosh, what's that landing on my leg or my arm or whatever? You feel it, you react to it. And then when you see what it is, no, you don't want to harm it. You want to respond to it positively.
That's perfect. That's really perfect. I've told this story to so many people, and nobody's ever come up with as perfect an example as that. That's exactly right. Because it's not always bad. I've flicked away, one too many ladybugs with instant regret. So yeah, that's really perfect. So one of the things that's been that I've been exposed to over the last month or so in the horse world has been a sexual misconduct, two sexual misconduct examples in the horse world that have had a devastating impact on the community, and it's been interesting to me to watch the reactions of the horse world to the falling of an icon. So just a little bit of background. George Morris is a former Olympian and Olympic trainer, and he's in his 80s now and has been at the forefront of the hunter-jumper equestrian world for 5 decades. He is definitely an icon. And he was recently banned for life from the sport for sexual misconduct with a minor. Now, these details are easy to find on an internet search, so I won't spend time going into the details. The thing that surprised me has been the response. Well, not the response, the reaction. It has upset people who have never met him, who don't know him, who weren't around when the misconduct accusations occurred, or even who just cannot get their heads around that this is happening to the George Morris. So it's been really interesting to me to watch as a community how we've reacted, which has not been very impressive, in my opinion.
Because it challenges our belief system.
Yes, exactly. And beliefs are really tough for human beings. So just a little bit of brain science. Our beliefs are set when we're between the ages of 2 and 6. So there's different brain wave states that our brain can flow through in different periods of the day, different periods of sleep, and definitely different periods of our life. And between the ages of 2 and 6, the frequency raises a little bit from the delta wave that you're in for the first 2 years of your life and opens up. Like if you've had children or been around children that are between the ages of 2 and 6, they're a little dreamy. They sort of have that dreamy, take everything in. They're super malleable, impressionable, suggestible when they're that age. So this is when our beliefs become set. And it's the people who are around us that really help us form our beliefs. You know, I can remember being really, really young and my mom coming home from voting in the presidential election and declaring how she voted and me thinking, okay, that's how I'll vote. And I was 5 or 6 years old. I mean, I was really, really young, and religion and religious beliefs become set at that time. So they're with us for most of our lives. So when something rattles our belief structure, there's almost nowhere for the brain and the mind to go, which is why it's so disruptive. And this disruption causes incredible discomfort. And discomfort is something that human beings don't do very well with. The bug on the leg is a perfect example of a fleeting moment of discomfort, because discomfort is a warning system that precedes fear. And fear is one of the most important survival instincts that a human being can have. So when something like sexual misconduct or sexual abuse comes up, it's really hard for people to get their heads around it, no matter what angle you're taking, whether you're hearing about it as a bystander, whether you have experienced it in your past and have tried desperately not to deal with it, whether you are an accuser, whether you are the accused, whether you're a good friend of the accused. All of these things create incredible discomfort, and human beings do everything they can to get away from discomfort.
Yeah, so true. All right, well then how do we create new beliefs? How do we change our perspective then? Because someone who has done something, you cited that example of George Morris, and a lot of people just cannot believe. And that's what they'll say, right. I can't believe he did that. I can't believe he did that.
Right.
How do we say, okay, him or whoever it may be, actually that person is actually guilty of that crime, whatever it may be. I'm not talking about George now necessarily, I'm talking about anybody. Suddenly it's flipped, that it is proven to be positive when they could not believe it. How do you then process that? Because you still don't want to believe it. And it's so innate, isn't it? You just can't budge from that. Like, I don't want to believe he did that.
Yeah, you know, the USA Gymnastics Michigan State Larry Nassar case is an incredible example of everything that we go through when our belief systems are disrupted. So we've run the entire gamut with him, right? From the early accusations to him being sentenced to 175 years in prison. And NPR has a beautiful podcast called Believed, which you turned me on to, and I listened to that. And it's such a wonderful, it covers the entire journey of these accusations and then him being found guilty. And now the processing and the healing that can happen. And so if you think about what it's like, depending on where you are, the most important thing is to become aware of things that make you uncomfortable. So I always talk to people about what are your red flags for discomfort? And they will vary in intensity. Most people, there's three main areas in the body that tend to reveal discomfort in the mind. So stomach, heart, and head. And I remember learning this in graduate school. I had a professor in a health class, and she talked about, you know, people will process things viscerally in their stomach by getting a stomach ache, in their heart by having heart palpitations, heart fluttering, increased heart rate, or in their head by getting instant headache. And if you're listening to this, think about when you get upset. Where do you feel that in your body? Do you know, Chris? Where do you feel it in your body?
I get a migraine.
Yeah, so head. So you go right to head. Mine is my stomach. As soon as my spidey senses start to tingle, my stomach starts to do loop-de-loops. So if I feel something in my stomach, I know it's already starting to bother me. So the body can help us reveal when we're feeling discomfort and disruption mentally, emotionally, psychologically, or even spiritually. And I love to have people start to pay attention to that, to start to tune into that. If you think about an athlete, when an athlete becomes nervous, pre-race jitters, pre-competition, anxiety, when things come down to the wire in a competition, whenever that pressure starts to set in, pressure will cause a physiological response. So the brain and the body are completely connected. And when our brain does something, it signals our body to do something, and vice versa. It's an incredible chicken or the egg thing. There's a whole argument in psychology. Do you think it first or do you feel it first? And my answer is, who cares? As long as you're sensitive to whichever one shows up for you. So for some people, they can become very aware of their thoughts quite easily. But for most people, it's much easier to tune into your body first and say, oh my goodness, my stomach is going in loop-de-loops. What's going on? What am I not tuned into? What's upsetting me that I don't know is upsetting me yet? So for you, it would be like your head starting to hurt. Or you might even instinctually reach your hand up and touch your head as a sign of stress. I don't know if you do that. Do you ever find yourself doing that?
Not really. No, I can't say that I do. But yeah, I think you may automatically react to, put your hand wherever it's hurting. Although you don't necessarily put it over your heart if your heart is aching, but you certainly over your stomach and your head. I could see that happening. So I think at this point, why don't we give our listeners some tools, some things that you would like them to think about that they could take away from this episode?
So the awareness is the key. Self-awareness is really beginning to gain some steam in the corporate world, which then will trickle down to the rest of us, thankfully. So mindfulness meditation, the yoga movement, retreats, people starting to focus on their mental health. Really, it's all about awareness. So if you can start to become aware of how you're reacting to things, then you can develop a positive and powerful way to respond to it. So for me, the first thing to start to think about is, can you take it? Can you take the not knowing? So you read something about Larry Nassar. There's in one of the podcasts, there's one of the victims was that the Nassars had best friends that they always had Sunday dinner with. And he ended up abusing starting at 6 years old, the daughter, right? And she told the parents when she was 12, and they couldn't believe it, right? They couldn't tolerate the upset and the emotion and the disruption. And so they did all these different things, these mental gyrations, to avoid having to tolerate the thought that this person that they have known for so long and loved so dearly could actually be doing what he was doing. So the first thing to think about is your reaction, to become aware of your reaction. The physiology, the stomach, the heart, the head, those are your triggers, your red flags that go off that you can start to tune into and say, okay, what's really bothering me? And then start to look and see, why is it bothering me? If you can identify that this is something that you really are having trouble with, sometimes that can just create enough space for you to be able to look further, to develop some perspective. In listening to the entire course of the Larry Nassar story, it's really amazing how some of the parents came all the way around and were like, it was so, and they'll admit, I couldn't take it. I couldn't tolerate it. So we have to be constantly working on developing our ability to tolerate discomfort and to tolerate negative emotions so that we can respond to them instead of reacting to try to get away from them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that's a great start, Jenny. Thank you so much for that, and we will continue this conversation in future episodes to hopefully help you and give you some tools and better understanding to deal with these kind of things and much more in your daily lives, not just in sport. So, Jenny, before we go, let's tell everybody where we can find you online, where they can read your blog, and how they can follow you on social media.
Okay, so it's really easy, drjenny.com, just drjenny.com. I'm on Facebook and Twitter, which you can all link to from my webpage. And I have blogs. I'm also on LinkedIn.
All right, and we, of course, are at Wisp Sports on all of those channels, and at wispsports.com you'll find the show notes accompanying this episode. Jenny and I will be back.
Well, hopefully we won't have to wait for something to happen, but I have a few ideas brewing already.
Perfect. All right. Well, we'll keep you posted here at wispsports.com. Please follow us and share. And if you have any questions for Jenny, do drop us a line to info@wispsports.com and we'll pass those along. Jenny, thank you so much. Look forward to our next conversation.
Me too. Thanks, Chris.